Hello, Patricia Awyan Lehman. How are you? Thank
Oh,
you.
go ahead.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, Heather.
Oh, I appreciate your visit so much. I was sent a link to some of your work, to some of your lectures, and I was absolutely blown away. I have 1,000 questions for you. Your work is absolutely amazing. I really enjoyed all of the lectures. You have two websites that people can address to check you out on. HorusRising.com is your website, and Chematology.com is a website that you share and that you give information. And you also do tours in Egypt and numerous other things. So thank you so much for being here. And can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and what it is you do in Egypt?
As of this week, I've been in Egypt for 13 years, which is amazing for me. I've been living here. I came the first time. I've always been attracted to Egypt since I was a young girl. Well, my dad used to get the National Geographics and the coffee table books about Egypt. And I'd go through the pages. Every time a National Geographic came, I'd race to be the first one to open it and page through and see if there was anything on Egypt. It had always felt like home to me. And the funny thing is, I was lucky to grow up in a very open-minded family. So as a young girl, I was also very intuitive and very interested in all of the esoteric sciences. And that was never sort of stamped out like it is in so many young children. It's like, you don't do that. That's not okay. It wasn't so much encouraged as it was accepted. And so I was able to explore that side of myself. Which is, I can't say how important that is. And I grew up in a natural environment. It was way out in the country, and my dad was a naturalist, just a really amazing man. So, for me, that was the perfect childhood. It was just wonderful. In Bucks County, in the woods, we planted trees. My dad and I, we planted gardens. We had dogs and cats and everything you can think of. Oh, it's just wonderful. So anyway, I waited. Sorry.
Oh, sorry to interrupt, but it was instilling this connection in you at such a young age. Sorry, continue, please. But it's so beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I always think so wonderfully of my childhood. You go through all the same childhood, knocks and falls. But when I think of all the things I got to explore, I used to run out into the forest, down to the lakes, talk to the fish, talk to the trees. This was my childhood. So I even miss that today, that ability to just hang out in nature. And I think we all somehow crave that at a gut level. So I was so fortunate because so many kids today don't get that opportunity. But anyway, as I grew older, I never lost that interest in the esoteric and the understanding of the world. I mean, I was born asking, why am I here? What is my purpose? And just being driven to figure it all out from every different aspect, not just spiritual, but science. I studied all the sciences, both esoteric and natural sciences, just trying to figure out what this is, this nature of reality. And I honestly believe today, and this, I normally start out even my lectures with asking these questions is what is consciousness? How do we perceive reality? Because we seem to think today that we perceive reality the same way. Throughout our lifetimes, but throughout generations and over the years. And from what I've understand, it doesn't work that way. And how we perceive what it is and what it is we're experiencing changes. But anyway, as I grew older, of course, my interest in Egypt grew, but I waited. I was in my late 40s before I actually took the plunge and said, I heard the voice that said, come on, Patricia, it's time to go. And I did the research. And I discovered a tour. It was called the Star Elders Tour. And it featured Abdel Hakim Alian, who was my father-in-law, was to become my father-in-law. And I read two of the books that he had assisted Stephen Mailer in writing, which was The Land of Osiris and From Light into Darkness. And what was written resonated so strongly with me that I took a tour with Stephen Mailer that was going to feature Hakeem as a speaker. At least he was going to lecture while we were in Giza.
Right.
And meeting him was just amazing. And the tour was mind blowing because things opened up to me. It was magical. I saw things then that I still talk about in my lectures today because the visions just started coming to me. It was amazing. But anyway, so I needed to come back, and even on the tour, they asked me, what would you do differently if you were to come back? What would you want to change about the tour? And I mentioned a few things like stay at the sites longer, a little less shopping, and all the things that I try and do today on my own tours. But I said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could get Hakeem to come out of retirement and join the whole tour? And so they did it. And a year and a half later, I was back on a tour that featured Hakeem as a speaker on the tour. He came with us to the sites. And he hadn't been there in so many years because he had retired. So he was, I think, he must have been in his 80s. Yeah, he was in his 80s when he went with us. And, Hakeem, I haven't mentioned, he was known here as a wisdom keeper, a key holder. He was indigenous Egyptian who had 65 years of field experience as an Egyptologist, also as an archaeologist. He had degrees in both. But he told me the thing that he had, the hardest thing he ever had to do was unlearn everything he had learned at university because it didn't address what he experienced through his senses at the sites. And that was his biggest lesson, is to walk in and don't accept what's being told to you, to open your senses, because we have so many more than we think we do. Right. And he said the sites were actually designed to open our senses, each one with a different frequency. Which would be described by the netters. That's a whole lot.
The netters, I have so many questions.
Awesome. So I will hurry. But anyway, and since then I've been back and I've come to live, and this is home, and my life is the research. It just keeps growing and expanding, and the things I'm finding are incredible. And I keep, I have folders upon folders of just so much information. And now I'm trying to get it. I tried to write a book when the whole COVID situation began. I sat down and said, okay, I'm going to use this time. And I wrote. And I found that the information, it's not linear. It spirals and it moves in cycles. And I couldn't find a flow to the book because everything is always referring to everything else.
Yeah.
Which was it's fascinating to me, but it's also a challenge to actually get the information out in a way that people can understand it. So now I'm putting everything in a format that will be like in a lecture series that we're going to feature on YouTube.
Awesome.
And this way people can go in and look, at all the different parts of the series, and you can move around and find what it is that you're looking for. So we're working hard on that and hope to get that started soon. But it's been wild. I do lead tours. I lead my own tours where I like to have a small group, and it's very intimate and we go very deep. And then I also work with several other people, like O'Brien Forrester. I work with Maria Wheatley's coming on a tour this coming March. Love her. She does amazing work, mostly generated from the Glastonbury, Stonehenge, that area.
Yes. And that connection to Egypt is so strong. That's been a congruent thread throughout. I'm not sure if you've seen this series, but one of the reasons I asked you too was because of how many touching points you address in all of your work. And the way these pieces come together was just, it blew my mind, because I didn't mean to interrupt you, but my work is mostly with Ireland, with the megaliths in Ireland. And I keep getting brought back to Egypt. And so this is a constant thread. So you guys are doing a tour together, you're saying?
She's coming on a tour where I have also Brian Forrester, and Susan Moore is sort of like, she's like my best friend. And also she's a geologist, and she's an open-minded geologist, Jurassic. She's a world-class Jurassic geologist. And what people don't understand is, we're not just walking through structures when we go into these temples. We're walking through, they're laid out in a plan, a sacred geometric pattern with angles. Everything has an energetic effect on it. The angles, the shapes, the alignments with the sun, star, moon, all of these things are important, but also the consistency of the materials that they're using. It's huge. So, and the place itself, the energy lines and grids and underground flow of water, all of these things combine to create this. It's the place where heaven meets earth.
Yes, yes, and those are through the currents. I don't even know where to start, because yes, you're like everything. Yes, you talk about the Khemit, Khem being the black land because of the silt from the Nile. And so this is, and the way that the nonlinear spiral, yes, absolutely. I've run into that with my work too, because how do you do this, right? So with the journey of the seed, right? The cycle that you talk about, and how everything relates to this description, because everything can be addressed in this context in some way, shape, or form. So these types of analogous spirals, I guess we could say, are what link all of these things. And so that I have the questions about the netter. I have questions about Adam and the sunrise and the new day, because it's like this switch that turns, and it's that point in the vortex where we go from up till down. And you describe this so beautifully. Can you talk to us a little bit about this?
Well, my favorite phrase is the dual opposing wave spin. It's the place where the two opposites meet. And this is what everything is about. We don't exist. We're not alive if we are not moving in a sine wave pattern. Actually, I could have stopped if we're not moving, because because that is the key. We are not alive. We do not perceive time and space if we're not moving.
Right.
And if we're moving, it's always in a physical universe, in a three-dimensional universe, our perception of reality. We're always moving in waveform, and waveform is sine wave. So you have your ups and you have your downs, and the place that the two meet, of course, is the hor. Hor is the horizon, right? So the horizon is the place where heaven meets earth. The top of the sine wave pattern is basically your kingdom of heaven, and the bottom is your kingdom of hell. But it's not heaven and hell as in one is good and bad. These are just two terms to describe you moving up and then moving down again, just sort of what you explained. And if you begin to understand the waveform and how it works, you get to the peak, there's a pause. There's always a pause at the peak of any pattern, and always a pause at the nadir, at the very bottom of any waveform. And this pause is key, because that's the moment of pure gnosis. If you understand it on a much bigger scale, and within the cycles, even within the day, when the sun is at noon or midnight, basically the reflected light of the sun or the moon, we perceive it to stop or hesitate for a few moments. During the year, it's the solstices, right, when the sun seems to stop moving, so our days don't get longer or shorter during the solstices. And in the great year, we have a much bigger pause, and it occurs every 12,000 years. That one's a biggie, but I'll stop there. So these things are perceived, in any sine wave pattern, but also in every cycle. All of nature's cycles experience this pause. In India, they called it the great yogic breath, because it is breath. Breath is life. So you breathe out and you pause, and you breathe in and you pause. And in these moments, especially when you involve back to center with your breath, that's your moment of complete gnosis, if you understand how to utilize it. In Egypt, they called it the Simatawi. So the Simatawi is like one of the most ancient symbols here in Egypt, and it speaks about this breath as the basis of everything. It's incredible.
Yes. And the hours and the Horus. And so it's all like you're saying in relation to time.
Yes.
Right. So, and then the sine waves, something that like spiritually or as a vortex, like they can be read two-dimensionally as a sine wave or three-dimensionally as a spiral.
Exactly. In order to understand it, we always go to linear. So we say sine wave, but everything spirals. There is nothing linear in our perceived Earth-based universe. Right. So it has to eventually spiral, even if it appears to look straight.
Right, but that's not, and that's all science. So sorry, I'm reading my notes here, because when you talk about the connection between heaven and earth, that being the vertical, and then the horizontal plane being the something that's speaking of polarity. So yes. East and west, or a positive or a negative charge. And these speak to that hermetic principle of both rhythm, polarity, and also like cause and effect, because when something hits the ripple, or the ripples or those waves interact, other things happen. And that's what a lot of this symbolism is implying as it draws these pictures. I love comic books, graphic novels. Yeah, right. But this is a great way to look at these in this sense, because they're telling a story of a mechanism, of a function, right? And how they're drawn. So, and that's what the so the Adam and the Eve is Eve night, so day and night, like that, like transition. Because that's one thing when I was going through your lectures, I wrote down some questions, because it kind of, you were like, you had so much to talk about. You could not talk about all of it.
Well, and that is my challenge when I even think about trying to get all this knowledge out. I have been doing it for my own benefit all these years. And, people are like, Patricia, you have to write this down. It's like, oh. So now I'm in this state of, oh my gosh, it's just this huge amount of material. But you're absolutely right. Part of the joy I have in my study and research is to find the basic symbols, like the Cosmic Serpent as the sine wave, your day and night pattern. This is a huge one. With Adam and Eve, it's quite interesting. Adam and Eve, I call it Adam and Even, because we're basically looking at even the two hemispheres of the brain. And this is something else. So many levels. When I talk about the great year, we know we have seasons. We have actually seasons during the day, if you will. We the sun rises at noon, and then the sun goes down, and then we have night, right? And we have these four different patterns, because we rise, and then we start to go down, and then we go down below the horizon, and then we rise again. We have 4 seasons in our year, but we also have 4 seasons in our great year. So we're constantly rising and falling through 4 seasons, described by the ancients as the pivotal points starting with the fixed signs of the zodiac. Yes. So you have your age of Leo, your age of Taurus, we fall into form, and then the age of Aquarius, we hit bottom basically, which is Saturn. How do you turn lead into gold? Well, if you're in the southern hemisphere, you're actually, we see in the northern hemisphere, Aquarius is beginning to rise on the horizon. But in the southern hemisphere, you're seeing Leo. So how do you turn lead into gold? Maybe you flip your understanding, or we actually flip our magnetics. So electromagnetism is the base of everything. So understanding the serpents and what's happening with the cosmic serpents, and all the different patterns that they use, the 7-headed serpents, it's just incredible. And you begin to understand how everything works. Now in Egypt, back to Adam and Eve, we had Atum, right? And Atum actually creates all of the other netters, right? Or he begins by creating of and by himself. This is the story, but it's not really. But Atum rides the sine wave. He is basically the atom that creates our, basically our perception through the sine wave.
Right.
But as he's creating, they say that he actually, he plays with himself basically to give birth, right?
Uh-huh.
But if you read some of the other stories, you realize that the hand that he uses, right, to masturbate is Hathor. It's Hathor, right? So you have the feminine involved. So it has to be coming together of the masculine and the feminine in order to create. And that is the pattern, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So the feminine is always the unseen force of nature in a way. Right. And the masculine is always, I am, here I am.
Right.
There's so many different levels of how to describe it. I mean, we have a patriarchal perspective, we have a matriarchal perspective, and they're two totally different things. You can't compare them. And it isn't about women dominating and being, the driving force. It's a reverence for the mother energy, the nurturing and the unconditional healing love of the mother. When you have a civilization that's based on this, you have peace, you have understanding. It's heart-based. The masculine, the patriarchal, is the warrior archetype. It's about division. Osiris gets chopped into 42 or 14 pieces because that's the division of falling into the night cycle. Right. So in a way, the masculine is the night. It's separation. It can't be any other way because we're polar. And we are polar in the other, in the matriarchal, but it's heart-based. Right. And so in heart-based, we have the ability to feel. And when you feel, you have the ability to sense all of the currents, right? You know how to manipulate and navigate them. You feel each other, that you don't need Thoth, Jehuti, we call him here, and Seshet, his true consort. They represent the ability to, written and oral language. We don't need that in a matriarchal civilization because we feel each other. I can sense you. I know what you're thinking. Exactly. So there's no need for written and oral language. Again, Tower of Babel, separation. Right. But in the feminine, we don't need that. We feel, and therefore there is peace, because how can you even lie to me? Right. Not that that's the reason, but you can't.
No, but you can't, right?
I feel you. You work together as one unit, like the bees, hence the queen bee. And again, another netter that represents that, right? Which is net. She is the fabric of this reality. Right. And when everything's working in unison and we all feel the fabric, we work together. That's the whole bee energy. So once you understand that, it's really interesting because women ritualistically throughout the ages are of the moon, but it's the reflected light of the sun. And I think it's because in a night cycle, we work behind the scenes. We're the hidden heart. We're hidden in the house, right? The heart is hidden. We are the heart. Absolutely. And I'm not saying women are, I'm saying the feminine part of myself, and the masculine part of myself is the one that dominates, because we have all been taught to hide our hearts. It's not safe to show your hearts or to expose your feelings.
No.
So yeah.
And this is that hermetic principle of feminine and masculine, and it being adherent to everything, to everyone. When we talk about the feminine and we talk about the masculine, it's in those archetypes that you're describing, and yet it's in all of us and in everything. And that intuit, as opposed to, it's like intuition versus logic. Yes. Right. And that separation. And I keep coming back to whenever I listen to you and look at these things, I come back to that pendulum effect, where there's those moments of complete entropy and those moments of perfect solid creation. Yeah. And it's these moments that are the in-between points, right? Those stopping points at the top and the bottom of these curves that give us They give us those moments where, and we think
Of
that it's
enlightenment.
like this.
Wow.
Exactly. But for the most part, it's pretty entropic. We're pretty just like,
Of
you know,
course, but we have those moments.
right,
And we
right,
have the opportunity to have more if we learn how to breathe.
right. And also if we learn to accept to go with the flow of those rhythmic ups and downs.
Or learn how to navigate them. Because once you understand, you feel them, you know how to navigate them. Yes, I'm having a bad day. Yes, this happened to me, but what did I learn from it? How can I navigate that energy? How can I make that, have that not happen again?
Right.
Or see the gift in it, So, I spilled coffee all over myself and I hit the road an hour late, but I missed the accident that happened that I might have been a part of.
Right.
So it's just navigating without getting, that emotion that can trap us or hold us hostage.
Exactly. But those are the unseen fields, right? Like the womb would be like the magnetic field, right?
Mhm.
And then the electricity, the charge moving through it is that motion of life within that womb, within that field. And
Yes.
so we're kind of um and he wrote like, okay, so he rides the waters called Nun in his sacred bark, and the sunset becomes Adam in this physical plane. So it's to me also reminds me of, because during the dawn and the dusk, there's the ring of fire, but there's also the ring of fire, which is the dawn and dusk red ring that's constantly moving over the entirety of the sphere, and that is like pushing a wave of particles, right, of energy, of solar influence of the day, right? And then it all kind of beds down. And in that time is when like, or when he comes back up is when the emerging one, right? So those beetles and all of this stuff. There's so much. And so we talk about the way that these there's this migration of the symbols and the angle of the light being how we interpret those single I don't mean to jump around. I promise but these archetypes you described as the angle of the light. And in my first book, I have a chapter called The Choir of Angles. And it's quotes and voices of all these different people describing things like this. It's just what I'm like, I love you. I don't know you, but I love you. Like, it's the same, and it's important because it's that level of diffraction or refraction or breaking up that gives us the spectrum, which is the chakra, which is the archetype, which is everything. And those are the decans and the netters. So can we talk a little bit about how these delineations break up to give us these different types of personalities?
Well, you did describe it in a way as that refraction of color from that prism, and light hits it and it refracts all these different colors. And you know how we've all each been described as we have a unique color. Well, of course we do. And so when we look at the netters, the way Hakeem would describe it is there were 360 netters, right? And each one would be an archetypal energy. But it's almost like we breathe out from center, if you will. So there's a center. And as the breath begins, it starts to separate into all these aspects. So originally, the netters, which are forces of nature, yes, it comes from the hieroglyphs for the consonants NTR. And NTR actually is our base for nature, eternal, natal. So all of these words, eternity, yes, all these words come from netter. This is what the netters, they weren't gods and goddesses. They weren't someone to be worshipped originally. Okay. This comes much later. Originally, this was how they utilized symbolism to describe our perception of reality. So these, as we breathe out from center, right, and as they begin, they're not male and female. Most of the netters were both masculine and feminine, but then they continue to separate. And as we do, as the breath goes out, that's the Big Bang, right? We separate. Now, what scientists missed out on is that the breath is always in and out, right? Up and down. You can't just have a big bang and keep expanding. There has to be a time when the breath comes back to center. So this is the involution, right? Back to center. We don't just constantly breathe out and continue to separate.
Mhm.
So this is the yogic breath, of course. So in the second half of creation, like I said, that all comes back to center, and that coming back is the matriarchal spin.
Mhm.
The patriarchal is when we breathe out into separation, hence the division of Osiris as the land, as the people, as as we perceive the universe in a night cycle, if you will. So anyway, as we breathe out, we have more and more netters, and the netters start to morph into Ptah, Soker, Osiris, right? He has three aspects of, different netters that were once a smaller group. So these are all, if you will, from center, they're all representing a different angle or aspect of light, angle, right? From center, the great central sun. Well, these angles, of course, are our angels. So how are our angels described? But well, you take your archangels, right, which are the major. You might have your centers and your like north-south lines and northeast. I'm trying to describe it as I see it in my mind.
Perfect. Keep going. Love it.
But you take Archangel Michael, as they say. He is the blue ray, right? So we have blue. So then you take, I think Gabriel is the purple ray. So each one representing, our major colors. These are the archangels, but all these little colors in between are also archetypal energies, and they're combinations, right, of different colors, oftentimes, most times. So these are frequencies. These are sounds. So you know how you can look at music in color. They're the programs. Well, because each vibration is a sound. Sound is creation. That first big bang is a sound. That's thunder. That's why we have so many thunder gods. And then there's lightning, right? So because based on our innate duality, you hear the thunder. So when you breathe back to center, you have a moment of silence, 3 moments, if you will, but then there has to be, based on our innate duality, a clap of thunder, and then the breath. And that's the breath that breathes out into all these archetypal patterns of energy that we are also angels of these lights. We are all angels. They like to, later they're called the fallen angels, right? Because we fall into form, right? We come from spirit and fall into form, and then we go back to spirit again. This is the cycle. It can't be any other way.
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that was also a question that I had written for you about so the age of Cancer, because a lot of like the transitions of the ages, like you discussed, like there's this question about age of Aquarius and the North, you brought that up too. And so like we know that during specific time periods, specific symbols were more prevalent, like the age of Aries, the ram was more prevalent, the age of Taurus, the bull was more prevalent. And then we go back to the Sphinx being the age of Leo, but in between there's a couple signs that we don't talk about very much. And when we talk about the time of the fallen angels, the time of the fallen light, that's 6,000 to 8,000 BC, right? Or years ago. So that was the age of Cancer. So that.
Well, 6,000 to 8,000 would have been Gemini. And
okay,
Cancer,
thank you.
Yeah.
That's
8 to 10,000 years. But you're absolutely right. If you look at the symbol of Leo, just the symbolism, right? The symbol of Leo is sort of like the first breath, right? The first breath of life after, and the way I describe it is after the flip in perspective, right? So then we have Cancer. And Cancer is basically, we actually flip from Capricorn to Cancer, but that's a whole other conversation. And then in Cancer, if you look at the symbol, it's basically the yin yang. It's the 69 in the container of the circle. So we have fallen at that point into the container, right? So this is the beginning of perception of, and we feel our duality within. We still feel it. This in Egypt would have been called the age of Aten. It's the highest state of consciousness when you're alive in a state of movement. So that's after the pause. This is what we breathe out into. And it's also Cancer rules silver, which is interesting, and it's of the moon. So this is the beginning of the night cycle. We fall into the night cycle. So then the next stage is Gemini. And what happens, boom, the two polarities have to split. They become the twins. In Egypt, the twins are Shu and Tefnut. It's air and water. They're atmosphere. And air and water, you see the images of Shu holding up Nut, the heavens, right? Because they are what separates heaven from earth. This is the separation, literally. That's why they're twins. And so Shu holds up the earth, and you don't see Tefnut. Tefnut is the Sphinx. She is the current, right? She is the moisture, but she's also the magnetism in the current. She is the telluric currents, right? Where Shu is the wind, he's the solar wind as well. Electromagnetism, that's atmosphere, and that's what separates heaven and earth. Yes. So then we fall into Taurus, the bull. Yes. And that's bull, and on the ceiling at Dendera, he's represented. It's a big black bull. That's the black earth. That's Chem. That's when we become truly dense and physical. So we lose our ability. I think before that, we had the ability. This is when we built our monuments. 8 to 10,000 years ago, 6 to 10,000 years ago, we built these amazing monuments because we had the ability, because we could, because we were shape-shifting. We could move between the spirit and the physical. Now there's stories about this, and I think a lot of them are misunderstood and misinterpreted, but it's like the Nephilim. It's all these stories where, that gods walk the earth. We were the gods that walked the earth. We were the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus, were basically described as being demigods, half human, half godlike, right? We walked the earth, but we could shapeshift, we could create, we could lift. Everything was much less dense, and we had higher capability, and had more awareness of our senses, the other senses that we have now fallen into form and lost that capability. Right. And remember, Cancer, I said, was silver. Gemini is Mercury, and then Taurus is Venus. I forget what that rules, but we begin to fall, and this is why you begin to see the changes in the ages. So we fall into Taurus, we fall into form, and the symbolism is the same worldwide. This is the time. They even say civilization began 6,000 years ago. That was the age of Taurus, right? Well, that was the beginning of the system, because once we fell into form and we lost the ability to feel each other, we required a system in order to, I hate to say required because we didn't, but we never needed a system, but unfortunately, because we lost our ability to feel, and we've needed the system to somehow place controls on us. So then you have the symbolism of the crook and the flail and all of these things that are used to keep the sheeple in line. This was the beginning. This was the age of Amun, the beginning of the Hanuti, that Hakim would talk about, basically the undertakers, the beginning when we had the concept of death, of physical death, because before that, we know we didn't have that. We believed we rose and like the sun, we rose and set every day over an eternal life, right? But when we fell into form, we believed we were our bodies. And it's just belief system. When we began to believe we were our bodies, we lost the ability to understand what it was we were perceiving. We don't die, but the Hanuti were the priests, right, that developed as Hakim said, they had the first harvestless jobs, because they developed a system wherein you bring me offerings, I pray for you, and maybe you'll go to heaven, and if not, you have the judgment scenes. If your heart weighs less than a feather, you're gonna, be eaten by the beasts, right? And you will no longer have eternal life. So this is the beginning of the manipulation, and control.
Because if your heart weighed less than a feather, it just meant that your body wasn't at maximum density, right? Well, so you were still of this lightness.
The judgment scene is interesting. It's like a tool, and tools can't be good or bad. It's how they're interpreted or how they're used. So if you understand, if your heart weighs less than a feather, then what are you? You're lighthearted. This is what gives you eternal life. You are not held down. Your heart isn't heavy with all the bad choices, right? Or the belief that those choices require a judgment, and you're going to go to a hell which doesn't exist, or you're going to be eaten by beasts that don't exist. See, this, like I said, is the beginning of the agendas and the manipulation for control. It's always divide and conquer, separation. So this all begins in the age of Taurus, and we just descend, and it gets worse. And if you look at where we're at today, we are in the biggest state of isolation. People are hiding in their homes for the past 20 months. And it's terrifying. And we're being told to wear masks and stay away from each other. And basically it's fear. And this is one of the largest lessons in the symbolism here in Egypt is fear is the thing that will, fear and anger are the things that will keep you held hostage in a body. And the only thing you can do is transmute this polarity, this inner polarity, in order to raise your levels of awareness. And once you understand and you're able to transmute your own inner polarity, you see that there is no good and bad.
Right.
It is all a part of our belief systems. Our belief systems create our perception of reality.
Right.
It's all an illusion, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And it's always been an illusion. It does, the only thing real is that we are all connected and have consciousness.
Right. Well, that's the part that we're coming back to, right? Because we're talking about that standstill, the age of Aquarius being the lowest point in astrology. That's like your attachment to social and like far out things and new endeavors, electricity, new tech. So there's like, that's happening. And this standstill at the bottom of the cup.
We are at the bottom, and every time you're at the bottom, there has to be a reversal. And as I said, how do you turn lead into gold? Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, which rules lead. Leo is ruled by the sun, which rules gold. How do you turn lead into gold? You flip your perspective, or the earth actually flips. It's magnetism. It's a magnetic flip.
Absolutely. And that it does seem that we are on trajectory for that.
Very quickly. And there's more to it than that, but yes.
Well, yeah, and we can address a little bit of that if you want to, because I have been for years asking people, like, do these strangenesses in the aurora. I study a lot of aurora, and it's those plane change interactions that is the induction of the charge. So it's more, the BZ is the up and down, and if the BZ is going up, all those particles that are coming in are going to push it away. But if the BZ is pointing south, it's going to bring all of that in, and then our system's going to have to digest it. So the question is the angle of the field changing the types of auroras that we see, the types of sprites, different types of electrical weather that we're starting to notice. And yeah, we have more higher tech, more people have phones, more people are paying attention to it. So we're going to have more information. People are going to be taking more pictures. But for those of us who've been looking at it for a long time, through a few solar cycles, it does look different. It does look different.
Absolutely.
So
this is where it gets interesting for me, and a lot of people have trouble digesting where I'm about to go. But I have been studying, as you walk into the temple of Dendera, and this is the temple of the netter Hathor. She's basically the womb that gives birth to our perception of life, of form. And as you walk in, you walk through a gateway, and if you look up, it's the only place in Egypt that you see the underbelly of the winged scarab. And Hakim said this meant you're walking into the place that has the answers to all of universal mysteries. This place is just absolutely incredible. And of course, I've spent a great deal of time over the past 13 years studying this place.
Right.
And as I started to study it, and the entire temple is quite interesting because it speaks to these cycles. When you go in the first hypostyle hall, you look up and you see this wonderful zodiac, and it's in, it's basically on the ceiling, right? And you go in a pattern to see everything that's there. But when you go up to the next level, you actually spiral. You spring into the next cycle. So you spring into summer, the next cycle. You're on the next level, and this is where they have the Dendera Zodiac that actually spirals. And it tells you everything that the whole ceiling in this first huge hall tells you, but it's in one panel and it spirals. So it's quite interesting, even, on so many different levels. And then when you come back down again, you fall. The steps go straight down. You fall back into winter or back into the night cycle, which again is quite interesting. The floor in a temple is always, the earth, and the ceiling is always the heaven. That's why you'll see stars on the ceilings. But as you walk through the temple, a lot of people don't notice this. The floor is always rising, and the ceiling is always coming lower until you get to the Holy of Holies, where heaven meets earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is even, again, I talked about the Hanuti of the priests. At one time, the temples, the structures were for everyone. But in the age of Taurus, they started the division that the general public wasn't allowed any further than, the big outer courtyard, and only for festivals. And then based on your level of knowing and understanding, the different initiates were allowed to different places, but only the high priest had the power and the strength and knowing to go into the Holy of Holies, basically. This is the way they would, as I said, divide what you were capable of utilizing within these amazing structures.
Right. How much you were allowed to access.
Access, exactly. And there's, again, two different ways to look at that. I always think of the movie with Jack Nicholson where, he's on the stand and he's in that case. And basically when they're trying to get him to admit the truth, he's like, you can't handle the truth. And maybe that's the way the priest felt, that we had devolved to such a state of mind that knowing all of this amazing, I mean, it's, again, tools can be used for good or bad.
Right.
And where we have a consciousness where we weren't capable of using them in the correct way. So again, there's always two ways to look at everything. We want to blame somebody for everything that's happening,
right?
But it's always our choice. It's always based on our choice.
Right. Well, because you won't give. I mean, you won't just give a 2-year-old a real hammer. You know what I mean? You gotta.
You have to evolve to a point where you know how to handle that.
Exactly. And that was the whole point of the initiates and all of the secret, societies that of all of the basic thing that they say is that all of these secrets have been kept for the protection of the business, for the protection of the people, for the protection of the information, because you can't handle it, you're not ready to handle it. And in some ways that is insulting, but in other ways it's like, well, but you're right. I don't think that I am equipped to handle a jackhammer.
Exactly.
I just don't think I am. Like, I'm not trying to be egoic and be like, I can do whatever. I can handle a jack. No, I probably can't. I don't know anything about it. It outweighs me. It's this gigantic thing that I am not physically capable of doing. So I'll say, hey, bro, would you mind? I need this jackhammered, and hire your help. Ask for somebody who can handle the pool to get the thing done. Because I do think, in many regards, what we're looking at are functioning tools. They're machines. They have an operative mechanism function, and they still kind of could work if we knew how to use them. And
I agree.
We've fallen out of that knowledge. But during this in time of like entropy and sitting still, all of those types of structures are starting to come apart, and the little bits are being taken and looked at, right? You've got a huge chunk of the pie, you know, and I'm coming in, I'm like, here's this cookie. Does it match? What do we have? What is going on? Until we can finally start to like,
we
really
all
start to
have huge
understand.
chunks of the pie. That's the funny thing. We all have huge chunks. We just don't know it.
Right. Well, it's like Osiris being separated, right? And so here we are, we have to go get him and all of his parts and put him back together.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
And who does that? The feminine, the internal knowing.
Yes.
Right. It's funny that you said that too about writing, because like I've written 2 books and both of them are very nonlinear. And I learned that from Derek Jensen, who's one of my favorite authors. And he's a great person. And he writes in a very nonlinear fashion. So when you're reading his books, you're he'll have like a anchor point to hold on to. Maybe it's one of the ones that's sticking out right now is the grenade rolls across the floor, right? Because at the beginning, he gives you a metaphor and it's like this grenade rolls across the floor and people look at it, but they don't want to talk about it. They're not going to look at it. They're not even going to acknowledge it or leave the room. And eventually that thing's going to go off, you know? So throughout this whole writing or this whole book, every once in a while when it's poignant, he'll say a grenade rolls across the floor and suddenly it connects all of those points. And so that's kind of what we're all doing in these respects. Like we have our little piece of the whole, and to be able to come together and put these things, because what you're describing as like the physics is the science. They understood the science and they understood it at a wholeness, a wholesome level where it was holistic.
Yeah, that's alchemy. That's looking at something from every perspective. That's knowing, that's feeling. We tend to look at things and take them at face value, and we're missing the whole picture.
Right. The gnosis.
Yes, gnosis.
Yes. And it's funny because next day Steve posted some, I'm terrible at pronouncing things, so please, but he posted this thing and it said something about the gnosis and like, is it the knowing or is it this? And I'm like, how often do we as women or we as people, but really, I mean, I don't mean to say it, but you like your girl says something to you and you're like, you know, sis, you already know, sis, because we have this, you know, it's that internal intuition knowing, like I don't really have to ask, I can just tell when I walk into the situation, the conversation, to your face, I can just see it because you know, sis. And I think that that's an internal knowing, and it's kind of offensive to some people who are uncomfortable with their feminine aspects. I'm not talking about their femininity, but that ability to sit with heart chakra, to sit with that green, right? Because the green is everything. Like leaves are green, the chlorophyll in leaves are green, but it's actually all these other colors that the plant is eating. It's just reflecting back that heart knowing, right? That like you give me all of this nourishment, I'm going to give you love. And not in just a romantic, like, hey, it's like a real nourishment. I'm going to feed you because you fed me.
Right. And energy,
yes. And knowing what we need and how we fall into those not fall into, but you said this, the symbols. Oh man, I could talk to you about the symbols of astrology and those alchemical points, because what the point that you made about Cancer and Gemini and Taurus, like we reconnect. And all of these energetic symbols, if we looked at them as if they were instructions, because that's what they are.
They are, exactly. Yeah. And our gut knows, all we have to do is look and feel them, and you feel the energy. I mean, even Aquarius, it's the 2 currents. And in Egypt, Aquarius is a netter called Hapi, and he sits at the base, you know, he's an elephantine, and he sits in a cave, and he's the one who pours out, like Aquarius, the 2 waters of heaven and earth, you know, the Nile and the Milky Way, right? One reflecting the other. he pours out the two waters, and this is basically on another level, the resurrection of Osiris, the land, from the flow of the flooding. It's the activation, the Ka force of nature that reactivates the land, brings it back to life, so that there will be planting, seeding, and a harvest, a harvest, if you will, the Horus aspect, the rising, right? And they perform rituals, and people don't realize this, but during different festivals, they created, and again, this has so many implications, but I got to be quick. They made these molds that were shaped like little coffins in the shape of Osiris and Sokar. Also, he's the silent aspect of Osiris when he's still in that state of gnosis. So they would put the black earth, and they would plant barley, seed, wheat, and corn, right? And that would rise. They'd nurture it with the water, and then they would bake bread cakes, right? Now, the water of the Nile during the flood turns like a mineral-rich red, right? That's the blood, right? Reactivating the body of Osiris, the land, right? So then they have these cakes, which is, you know, the body of Osiris. And then they would have the festivals and even the Hebset rituals, where the king had to eat the cake from every gnome, every division of the body of Osiris, in order to unify Upper and Lower Egypt. Now he's unifying the land. It's again the resurrection of the kings, a new cycle of leadership, his right to rule, all in these resurrection rituals. And of course, the wine made from the grapes that came from the flow of water, or even the beer was made from the barley, right? So it's the blood of Christ and the you know, and the body of Christ. Our rituals today are based on very ancient rituals that are based on something even more sublime and incredible. It's that resurrection week with the reactivation of the inert, that which is not moving. And we do it all over again, eternally.
The age of Pisces, that recycling of that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah. That's like amazing. And I think that we dishonor ourselves and our history to not acknowledge the truth of where these things come from, and like allow it to dig back, because to put them in these other contexts, they've been, and that was like I said, I have my notes for you are like everywhere, but about that changing of the changing of the symbols, like as they migrate, symbols migrate through time, places, and cultures, because they can start as this and then turn into that. And one of the favorite tricks of not just the Romans, but many other conquerors, the British and all the others that, you know, what they do is they kind of adopt a little bit of the local culture and dress it in their own garb, and then give that to the people so they'll accept it a little more readily, you know, until the transition period is over, and then now it's the garb, and it was always ours.
Exactly. Even when I talked to an indigenous, a representative of the Indigenous Australia, and she was a knowledge holder, and she said that when they came to Australia, the British, they introduced the story of Mary, Jesus, and Joseph, and it's something they all knew within their hearts. Yeah, the names, the icons were different, but it's the age-old story. And that's why I say it's the same from Egypt into Christianity. And you're absolutely right, because when, you know, they wrote the Bible, they did it in that respect. They're basing it on the same. It's codified. It's full of this symbolism that explains everything, the mysteries of the universe, and every level of understanding is valid. This is the funniest thing of all. There are 7 levels, at least 7 levels of meaning for every symbol, right? For every story, for every icon. And you can, you know, the one we're told is that physical chakra level. It's that basic face value level, and it's not wrong. It is what it is for that level of understanding. But as you awaken and raise your level of consciousness, you can begin to see all these different levels, and you understand that, wow, it also means this, and it can mean this, you know, and you know, when you reach that, wow, it has such a multidimensional an impact. It's insane. It's incredible. But we're not always ready for that. And it changes, it fluctuates within one person. We're not always up here. We're not always here. We're not, you know, we move and change. And that's the beauty of being alive on the sine wave current.
Yes. We're constantly, sometimes we're real base, like bring it back to base. I gotta come back. I gotta ground
Ourselves. Exactly. We have to ground ourselves.
I'm way over here right now and I'm floating around and I've completely disconnected from my earth self. I have to ground.
Exactly.
And that's I love this too, because I often run into this with people or throughout, you know, like it's a struggle of trying to explore things in a different view than what's normally presented. So when you try to talk to others about it, we have to find out where we are both at so that we can find our meeting point.
Yes.
And then be able to communicate from there. And one thing that strikes a lot of people is really difficult, but it's the most important thing I've found. And you're saying it, and it's that it's all right. ALL, separate word, RIGHT. We are all correct.
Yes.
And so there doesn't need to be this division. And that's the point. That's the main point, is that those divisions are what separates and keeps it from coming back together. In order to, I mean, if you wanted to argue with me, we would not just had the most wonderful conversation, you know, because we wouldn't be able to receive any of this information and share information. And so that's that nurturing of what we're given. Here's the gift of knowledge. Here's the gift of conversation. Here's the gift of sharing. And now it becomes this thing because we're at every level has some understanding, you know. And so if I'm way off in the moon and I'm way over here right now, and you come up to me and you're at base and you got your feet on the ground, you're gonna be like, wait, you know. So we have to kind of come, and you know where's in the middle right there? That green heart chakra.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
That's the meeting space. So gosh, I've taken a lot of your time this morning already, and I wanted to ask you just a little bit before I let you get on with your day about your tours that you do, and that if anybody might want to join you, find out more information about your work, because this is like it's the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you have so much software.
I love this so much. It's like my passion. So for me, it's not even work. It's like, wow, this is like, it, especially like this conversation we've had, to speak with someone who gets it, because then I can really explore and we can go deep and we can have so much fun, because it is fun for me. You know, yeah, we live in a crazy world and we don't know what's going to happen next, but I so solidly believe in peace and joy amidst the chaos. We must live in peace and joy. You know, we learned how to navigate. We need to learn how to navigate the currents. And it doesn't always look great out there. But stay here, stay centered, stay in your heart. And sometimes the rest of the world just passes you by, and it's okay to be the fool on the hill, right? Why not? But also, it's incredible. I do these tours so that I can show people. There's so many sites here that it's too many sites here, and yet I ask people, which one don't you want to see? And it's like, well, no, we can't cut that one out, no. I love to show all of this knowledge, and allow people to experience it in their own way, but to encourage them to open their senses. And I never say this is how it was. I say, based on, what I know, what Hakeem told me, what I've researched, what I've studied, these are all huge possibilities. Yeah. I'll say, this is what Egyptology says, and this is what Hakeem said, and this is what I've garnered through my research. But it's just a way to awaken within. And sometimes I take people on, it's a spiritual journey, and we'll do some work along the way. Again, some of my smaller tours, every once in a while, I'll do something like that. And other times it's like, let's go, I'll tell you what I know, and then, experience it for yourself and feel it for yourself. It's always a journey of awakening. Egypt itself, the land is powerful. The place is always the most important thing when they build these structures. Egypt itself, it's almost like when creation happened, that consciousness created this place on earth that would embody everything, all mysteries in one place, and the powerful energy and the ability, these structures that they did build. And again, you know, a lot of people want to say gods or aliens. And I always say, okay, we were the gods, right? What is a god? And you know, again, to throw that question back at people, what is an alien?
Right.
What is a god? Come on, let's go deep with this. What, you know, do you believe what you're told, or have you ever sat down and thought about it? You know, the definition of an alien is everything you're not. Okay, fine. Well, I'm not, maybe what I was once is not what I am now. And if I at one time had the ability to walk through walls and lift, you know, 2,000 tons, then no, I wouldn't describe that as who I am now. That's something alien to me today. But it might have been me. It might have been me in another state of consciousness. Human beings. Hakeem was adamant. Humans, Egyptians, you know, and they wouldn't have even been called that then. But humanity would have built these structures. We don't need aliens. You know, people ask me questions about the moon and Sirius, and I say there is no moon, there is no Sirius. Nothing exists. It's none. It's all none. Until the breath. And it's consciousness, you know, it imagining itself into existence, and we living this amazing experience, but it's not real. Everything we think is real isn't. And once you realize that, and you realize how powerful you are, that there is nothing that is impossible. Everything is natural. There's no supernatural. It's all possible. There's unlimited potentials. And, you know, we only limit ourselves by our belief that we are these physical bodies that can't do anything. Well, that's ridiculous. It's, you know, we need to expand our horizons, if you will.
Absolutely. And that's the first Hermetic principle, mentalism.
Yeah.
It all starts in your thought.
It does.
Both. It starts
changing, just starting to live life like, you know, your heart develops, you know, you go with your heart, you follow your feelings, and you start to just believe that you can do anything, and you eliminate fear. Right? And without fear, miracles happen. You know, just try that little test, is start doing things and not be afraid. You know, what's the worst that can happen? You know, this attitude, and your life will become a myriad of magic and miracles. Absolutely. And I don't think magic and miracles, really, it's not. It's natural. These things we are capable of doing every day.
Yes.
You know, I've manifested rainbows. I've manifested weather because I believed I could.
Because you believed you could. Because you believed that you could. And because we are our thoughts. We are what we envision ourselves to be and where we envision ourselves to be. And it takes, it's interesting how human psychology works. It's the same type of like entropic philosophy. I guess you start as a whole thing, and then that whole thing kind of has to dissolve and then reconstitute itself into what you think is the real thing, right? Oh, this is me. You know, I learned now. But then it'll wind up happening again, like whether, you know what I mean? And so it's like about that, going with the rolling with it and being.
Hakeem used to say, words themselves are our containers. You know, people call me Patricia, but I'm so much more than Patricia. Patricia is a container. It's a label. And, you know, if we could just break free from that and go back to our hearts, it's yeah.
That's it. That's it right there. That's what we're doing. I think that's what we're doing, and what you're affording people the opportunity to experience when they come to walk into those temples with you, because they might feel a feeling, but not understand the feeling that they're having. And so having you show them a thing or two, then all of a sudden they're seeing so many more things. It's like my friend Bill, and the guy was like on the tour was like, Bill's remembering all of this. So if you guys have any questions, just ask him. And it's true. Like he feels the memory. He can walk into that plane where time doesn't really exist and it's all happening simultaneously in a way, it's amazing. And that's what open-mindedness and being receptive gives us. I think that in this society, that this system that is so masculine, which is action oriented, we have to be taking action and we always have to be doing something, right? We're not sitting and digesting and thinking and feeling. So and sometimes you like act on impulse. We've gotten to that point and it's time to sit back. And I think that when we go to these structures, when we go to these places, I've only been to them in the United States. I went to Abu Dhabi, but I went to a mosque, but I didn't go to any like ancient sites in that area of the world. And then I've been to England and through there and many, many places. When you walk in Avebury, lots of different places in Glastonbury, even the ruins of the Abbey, you feel it. There's petroglyphs here in Michigan that are, according to the Native Americans, it's the story of our creation when we came out of Mackinac, when humans came out of Mackinac Island and were sent in these directions. Then it's the same story that you hear from many indigenous people. Like you were saying, it's the same story and it's carved on this rock. And when you go there, you feel it. You feel the whole of the land. You're in this, it's like a time where like time does not exist. You're just in this place. And my dog was he's a puppy, but he wanted to climb up on rocks and just sit on them. He wanted to just be there. And he's a Scorpio. He's very into
I love him already.
Yeah, he's awesome. And he was just feeling it, going to certain places. And he's a lab too, so they're very sensitive. And I kind of followed him around the petroglyphs and let him take me to places, and we found some really cool rocks, some very interesting things. And it's I think really cool to go someplace like that and see how an animal is responding, how your pet is also responding to the energies and other people's animals, because a lot of places like that don't let you take your dog. And this place, because they do, lots of dogs are there.
That's awesome.
They're all kind of doing the same thing and going into the same places and having like reactions to the same vortex, to the same energy spots. And that was just a really, really cool experience to have there. And I think that that's what all these connection points are. And we're starting to be able to see them. And I can't thank you enough for your work and following your heart and passion to lead you to this work in this place. I'd like to talk to you more about structures. I don't know how much time, if I could borrow you for like maybe another 10 minutes, would that be okay? And I could just talk to you about the structure of the Temple of Hathor, because it is very, very similar to the interior passage of Newgrange.
Yeah, I was there, I think 2.5 years ago.
Oh, cool.
So I was in Ireland for the first time. So yeah, we went there, and I just wanted to stay longer. You're in and out so quickly on the public entries, and
Right. But did you get to go, you went to Newgrange, did you get to go to Knowth or Dells?
Where?
Knowth.
Yes.
You went to the whole system. So when you were there, since you spent so much time at the Temple of Hathor and Dendera, did you notice any similarities offhand and feeling and structure, any of?
Well, it's different. The stone circles call to me. I mean, I've been to Scotland 3 times now, and I want to go back and just bounce around with a friend so I can spend more time. And of course, I've been to the UK and seen, been to Stonehenge and Avebury, like you said, in Glastonbury. Oh my gosh, there's just so many places I can just hang out forever and ever. Ireland seems like a whirlwind tour to me, but the energy of the sites was so beautiful and powerful. You just want to immerse yourself in the energy. And I always feel a deep connection to the earth when I'm at those sites, and not just to the site, but to the entire earth. You can feel that those are nodal points that connect everything. And it is similar in Egypt. In some of these places, you feel that connection. But the one beautiful thing about Egypt is everything was covered in sand, and the sand protected it. So we had the protected, the symbolism and the iconography, and even the paint, is still looks like it's somewhat fresh at so many of the sites. So we have more to peruse and more to study and more. There's just so much more that's left. For me, it's a different experience, but similar. You mentioned, Dendera again. It is the structure, but it is also the messages of all of those things that I talked about, the information that they were able to put through, place there, symbolically, and through the symbolism of the astrology. And all of this, that we could actually connect the dots on the map, because sometimes you can't, with symbolism, but the astrology made it so much easier. And understanding the base symbolism of what Nut represents and what Hathor represents. And it's hard to explain. I mean, I saw things just start to dance for me. When you see that it's Hathor's head, her face, that is born as the face of form. And then that face becomes an icon in every gnome. It changes a little bit because it's the archetypal energy, the face of form, depending on the angle of the sun at that particular latitude. You know what I mean?
I'm so glad I asked you this question.
It's in, and then that face is born onto a structure, and it's basically a temple, which means form. So it's born as the face of form. And the two pillars are basically the pillars of Boaz and Joachim, right? Because one is like very light, it's light blue and white squares on the pillar, and the other one is dark gray and in a darker blue. So you're looking at the polarity of the face of form, right? And then the dance begins. Osiris is off. He's Orion, but he's Osiris, and he takes the first step, right? Action of the sine wave, the hero's journey, right? And he's looking behind him, and behind him is Horus, and Horus is his ascended self. Horus is the birth of the masculine and feminine, but he's the hawk. He has wings. Osiris he's always portrayed as being a mummy, but originally you'll see images of him wrapped in his own wings, right? That's the physical perception of reality. We still have them, but we forgot. We're wrapped in those wings representing electromagnetic energy in a way. So we're wrapped in this cocoon of electromagnetic energy, the magnetic fields that surround us.
There are angle wings.
Right. So when you see Osiris, and I know I'm going on tangents, you'll see Osiris in between Hathor and Nephet. Nephet is her twin sister, right? Well, no, she's a twin with Set, but they're the two sisters. The duality of the two, and they have their wings wrapped around Osiris. Isis and Nephet on one level are the magnetic field of the earth, right? And that's where consciousness lies. It's the feminine, right? That's consciousness is in it. So you see the wings up, and that's the cocoon. That's our cocoon. That's our belief that we are physical. What happens if the magnetic field dies? It's weakening right now, right? Exponentially, our magnetic field is weakening because this is the moment in time. The earth is faced toward Polaris. We came from Vega, right? As we're going on the circumpolar spin. So Vega was the feminine. Anything that begins with a V has a feminine understanding, right? We could go through all of the, but it's feminine. Well, we went around and we fell into form, age of Taurus. We were just as we're coming out of facing Fugan, right? And then we come around and now we are literally the opposite at Polaris, polarity. So we've gone from unity consciousness to separation consciousness. And now it's time for the reversal. And what's really amazing is in the resurrection scenes of Osiris, you see him and he's laying on the bier. He's laying on the bed, right? He's dead, flat on his back. But then you see, and in one of the depictions, Horus is standing there and he says, Osiris, he says, turn over and rise. And that's what you see in the imagery. The next image you see Osiris is turning over. He's flipping, right? Magnetic flip. Reversal of spin, reversal of perception. When you've hit rock bottom, the only way out is to change your perception, your perspective. So he has to then turn on his stomach. You can't see my hands, I'm here doing it.
Oh, no, but I'm like, yeah.
Turn on his stomach, and then you see him begin to rise. And then you see, literally, that's the resurrection of Osiris, after he turns over.
After he turns over.
See, this is really important. That's only one aspect. It's all over the temple. And it's in that first hypostyle hall. And it shows you, if you were looking at the pattern and you're going through astrology, you would think, and when I look at it, you can look at it in terms of a day, path of the sun during the day on the ecliptic, or you can look at it as the path of the sun in the year, going through all the signs. But when you go on a great year, right, the precession of the equinoxes, which is a 24 or 26,000 year cycle, you actually perceive it as going backwards through all the zodiac constellations, right? Well, I look at it in all three ways, but my story is best told in the great year because it talks about the 4 seasons of perception, consciousness, rising and falling, rising into unity consciousness, falling back into separation consciousness. And they show it happening. So you would think you would go like this, but you don't, because what you have is Newt literally swallows the sun at the end of the day, right? So she swallows the sun goes through her body, which is the southern hemisphere, and she gives birth to it again the next day. So if you're following the pattern and you were going to walk across the hallway, the big hall to the other side, you would think you would find Capricorn. But Hakeem made it very clear that the winged scarab, and I probably shouldn't be telling this story because you have to be there to actually understand it. But what I'm trying to say is the pattern isn't linear. They show you that the pattern is the infinity symbol. This is how you walk through the hall. Nothing is linear. No. But you have to do this infinity. And that's the truth. It's eternal cycles of moving back and forth between the two dual opposing wave spins. So there we go, we brought it back. Also. Yes,
you did. We just had a wonderful non-linear conversation that did this.
Yeah, sorry about all that, but it just is so fascinating.
It is. Oh, well, I appreciate you. I won't take up any more of your time today, but I really appreciate this and having this conversation with you. And you've taught me so much, and there's still so much to learn. So if people want to, highly recommend checking out your lectures. If people want to do that, they can look on horusrising.com and chemitology.com. And we will put those links in the description box below so people can find you there. Oh yeah, thank you.
And this has been great fun. I totally enjoyed it, Heather. It's wonderful to meet you finally.
Oh, you too. And I hope that we can speak again some more in the future because I have 1,000 million more questions.
I would love that. Be happy to.
Awesome. You have a wonderful day.
Oh, you too, Heather. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.